Welcome back to part 2 of chapter 1.1 notes on points, lines, and planes. Our next undefined term that we are going to go over is planes, which is a flat surface made up of points that extends infinitely in all directions. An easy way to describe a plane is simply to think of a piece of paper. Piece of paper is a flat plane or flat surface which you can create multiple points, which remember points are locations, and think of that piece of paper extending as far as you can think. So the paper can be as large or small as you want. To create a diagram of a plane, what we need to do is we need to create 3 points, which we are going to label as B, C, and D. Now what we are going to do is we are going to connect all those points together, but in a quadrilateral, which a quadrilateral is defined as a figure with 4 sides. Now this plane will have all 3 of these points on that surface. Now since we have already made this surface and the 3 points are already labeled, we can also label the plane, which we are going to label as plane K. One important note is that points will always be capital letters, lines will be lowercase letters, and planes will be written as capital letters. Now, to write what the name of a plane is, what we're going to do is call it plane K, or we can write it as plane BCD, plane CDB, or any combination of those 3 points. When we have points that all lie on the same plane, they are said to be coplanar. As stated, there is exactly one plane through any 3 non-collinear points. Now what this means is that if we have 3 points, then we can only create one plane through those 3 points. If we try to create any other planes, they will be the exact same plane as the one we drew before. In example 1, our directions tell us to use the figure to name each of the following. Now in part A, it tells us to find a line containing point N. Now, when we look for point N, it is right between points M and O. Now remember, a line can be drawn between 2 points. So the line that we are going to look at is that line right there. Now, there can be multiple ways that we can write or name that line. One way that I think that we can write it is as line C. Another way we could write it, we could also write it, remember, you can use 2 points to name a line. So we can also write it as MO with the line symbol above it. Now I want you to tell me one other way that we can write this line. Please pause the video in order to write the line containing point N. In part B, we need to use the figure to name a plane that contains points P and M. Now, remember, when we are looking at a plane that contains 2 points, we can either write it as plane, whatever the name of the plane is, or we can write it as the plane with 3 points. Now, the name of the plane right now is plane A. Now remember, another way to write it is where we write it as the plane with 3 points contained on that plane. Which 3 points we can think of, we can say point P is on the plane, point M is also on the plane, and finally there are 2 other points we can choose from, either N or O. which I'm going to choose N. So we can write this also as plane P, M, N. Now I want you to take a second and pause the video and give me one more way that we can write a plane that contains points P and M. Now in example 2, it tells us to name the geometric terms modeled by the picture. The first geometric term that we're going to look for that is modeled in the picture is going to be a point. Now, when we look at this flower, the center part of the flower is called the stigma. This would be synonymous with a point. So we can say point A is the stigma of the flower. Now, also within the flower, we have the stem, which if you were to look at a stem, that looks a lot like a line. So in order to write a line, we can either use the 2 points that create that line, which are AC, or we can write it as line D, which I'm going to just write it as line AC, which is the stem of the flower. Now finally, we need to look for a plane. Now, they luckily give us a paintbrush, so we know that this is a painting. So, in order for them to draw this flower, it has to be put on a piece of paper. So we can say that the paper that they use to create this is the plane. Now, it doesn't give us what the name of the paper is, so therefore we're going to have to use 3 letters to do that. So we're going to call it plane BCA, and that is the paper. That is the end of part 2 of chapter 1.1 notes. Please continue on to part 3 to continue on with the chapter 1.1 notes.